that you are in to actually facilitate some of this learning, right? Whether with the games that you have, right? So all the sharing has to come from you as well, and not just our speakers on the panel, right? And then the second and third question will come up as a poll. So I'm going to ask Clarice to launch the poll for us to jump in and also share a little bit more about ourselves. Don't have a tattoo. Thanks, Kenjin. All right, so hopefully jump in, look at the poll. So what role do you play? On most days, I mean, of course, there are some days that we don't want to play those roles and we'll play other roles. Like today, I'm not playing the typical role I'm in. I'm a jester, so I'm here to entertain. Yeah, so indicate that. And then for today's session, why are you here? Like, you here to try and like get some great ideas and then beat everyone else at the gaming kind of format. That's why you're here to win. You're here to learn. You're here to connect with other people, network a little bit, right? Or you're here just to have fun. Yeah. Guess which one I am. Cool. Let's take a few more seconds for you to put in your responses to the chat, to the poll and the chat. If you are still putting in the chat, oh, Xingying has two. She's a wizard and a jester. All of the above. Wow, Amy. Hope you get all that you want to get. Play and connect and learn from others. Great. Thanks, Charles. Yes, Michelle. Michelle's playing like all of the above. Okay, although the roles, I don't play all the above. I'm not a parent. I'm an educator, perhaps. Great. We have 24 of you out of 32. Perhaps we can end poll and then share poll. And then we get a sense, an overall sense of who are here. We got quite a number of educators. So educators, pay attention. Yeah, this is all for you. Parents as well. And then there's some of you who are game developers, game designers. There's few youths. So youths, we like to hear from you as well, yeah, because you are the people who are probably usually at the receiving end of or whatever we're going to talk about. So your feedback is really important to hear from you. And then educators as well, what challenges you might face, what are some of the experiences you have, parents as well, game designers, game developers, share your experiences in developing some of these games, right? Everybody, most of you are here to learn. So most of you are also here to have fun. So let's have fun together. And some of you are here to connect. Yay, nobody's here to win. Come on, guys. When you play games, you're not here to win. You don't play games to win. What's this? Okay, anyway. So, all right, cool. Thank you very much for all your sharings. And the last check-in is, if you can put into the chat now, really type out for real, what curiosities do you have about today's session? Since there's so many of us who are here to learn, what is it actually you would like to learn more about? Or what are you curious about? Right, so I'm going to put that question into the chat. Oh, Clarice has done that. Thank you very much, Clarice. So what do you want to learn from today? Thanks, Kenjin, for clarifying. Wow. So we have people who are saying how to use games as educational tool. Want to hear Matthew's life story? Oh gosh, I don't think we've got enough time for 1.5 hours. Matthew's life story will probably spend the 1.5 hours. Want to explore different kinds of games and methods beyond what I'm familiar with. Not sure if I have time to education tech and games. Okay. How to facilitate. How to learn and play in a fun way. I'd like to see how I can balance education and interactive gameplay, fun facilitation ideas and tips. How games play a role in education, job opportunities for the untapped market. Ooh, Kaypo, sure. Always welcome. Because Kaypo is a Singapore slang for being a busybody or someone who likes to jump into many aspects of things and wants to be a part of everything, right? How to facilitate well such games, cause it's different from party games. Yep. Learn new games that might be of use. How to incorporate play in a limited curriculum space. Oh yeah, that's really an important question because we're always short of time. Yeah, time is a very scarce resource. How to have fun and educate. Cool. Thanks everyone for sharing all the points. At this juncture, I think I've spoken quite a bit, and we probably haven't introduced ourselves a little bit. So my name is Michelle, and I will be moderating the session. My full-time role is actually facilitating programs, facilitating training, learning, etc. So in different aspects of work, right? So in this period of time, my role is a lot to do with teaching other people how to facilitate, and then also then facilitating conversations, facilitating learning, facilitating well-being, and then facilitating design thinking. That's like the buzzword of this period of time, right? So that's me. I'm going to hand it over to Xi-Wei and Matthew. Of course, they're going to do it in a more interesting manner. They are obviously the gurus in gaming. So I'm going to leave it to them to introduce themselves in the most fun way possible on screen. Who would like to go first? Anybody wants to do a like rock, paper, scissors kind of thing to go? Okay. Xi-Wei has pointed to Matthew.
Sure. I'd be happy to. So thank you, Clarissa and Michelle. This is a wonderful honor. Really appreciative to all of you for also joining today, whether you're in Singapore and it's rather late in the evening, or like I am right now, I'm on the East Coast and it's not as early in the morning as it was planned to be. Thank you to daylight savings time. It's only 8:30, so manageable. But thank you to all of you for being here. I'm going to share a little bit about me, just like as a traditional introduction. I'll share a little bit about the organization I work for, and then I have a small, like very short game. I know Michelle is talking us up as the gurus or the experts in gaming, but I want to make sure that we have all the time we have planned for the actual panel for us to just chat and learn from one another. But a short bit about me. My name is Matthew Kreutter. I'm the current director for learning and engagement at an organization called Games for Change. I started my career in computer science, so I'm giving you some hints for my game later. But I started my career in computer science. I moved on from that to teaching, and then started work in nonprofit at a smaller organization called Connected Camps, where we did direct consumer classes in tons of different subjects. So we had programs in virology and archaeology and architecture business and math and science and just engineering in Minecraft. All of this was in Minecraft. And so I really learned a lot about what it meant to use games as learning tools for kids during COVID. So the organization blew up in 2020. Obviously, there was a big need for virtual programs for kids to learn and engage with one another. And this was really the direction that I took, coming from the classroom to exploring ways that games could be used to connect kids that were really lacking connection and connect kids that really needed innovative ways to learn during this like crazy time in our world. I moved last year from Connected Camps to Games for Change, where I managed two big programs. The first one being an esports league, so a national esports league, which I'll bring a little bit of that, I guess, experience. It's not the traditional way that most nonprofits approach game-based learning. You know, we have gamification and we have learning games and board games and ways for kids to explore these big issues like climate change or sustainability through games. But kids can actually learn a lot as well just from playing games, things like esports and playing on a team and building those soft skills. So I'll bring some of that experience. And then at Games for Change, we host events, I think, very similar to the Impact Playfest. And so I support an event every year called the Next Gen Summit that actually brings exclusively high school students to do exactly what it sounds like the Impact Playfest does. They showcase games they've made. They learn from game designers. We have workshops from Unity and workshops from Hasbro about tabletop games. We like to bring youth in to learn and then also to share. So I'm really excited to see, Michelle, thank you for that poll, that we do have some youth here with us today. And I like to think of you all not as always just the recipients of the games, but as creators as well. I think it's such an amazing opportunity for all of you to be at really the forefront of these conversations, just because it's your world in the future, and hopefully the improvements we can make to education and the improvements we can make to the world in general really come from you all and your ideas. So I know the panel presumably has me and Michelle and Clarissa and Xi-Wei talking a lot, but hopefully we hear some of your thoughts as well. So I'm excited for that. A tiny bit about Games for Change. We're a New York-based nonprofit. We've been around for a little over, I think we turned 20 last year. So we're coming up on 21 years, which is really crazy. And Games for Change was started by a group of designers and activists and academics, just various people across industries who wanted to come together to answer the question, really explore the question. We can't answer the question in full, but explore the question of how games can be used for social good. And this includes education, but it also includes broader social change. And so hopefully that's also something I can talk about beyond just learning, but also as games being used as a way to advocate for different groups of people or advocate for different social change, create movements across sustainability or other goals that we might have as a society, really beyond learning, but as a medium for social change. And so that's really our core mission. We host festivals, we bring people together, we do some executive production, we make our own games, but it's really all at the core of how can games be used for social good, whether it's learning or social change, beyond just entertainment. So I'm really excited to bring that to this panel. And this is my little game. I'm almost done, I promise. I have three quick little games we can play. It's Two Truths and a Lie. This was my favorite little game to play with students when I was a classroom teacher. And so I'm going to paste three things into the chat, and I'll read through them. Two of these things are true, and one of these things is a lie. And I'll give everyone about 20 seconds just to type in the chat which of them they think is the lie. So you are trying to figure out which of these things I am lying about. So here's the first one. I taught high school math. I have a dog named Teddy, and I speak English and Spanish. So go ahead and type in the chat which of these things you think I'm lying about. It's so interesting to see. I feel like there's a little bit of when you see someone put one, you're like, oh, it's got to be that. And so you'll see like a string of, oh, it's the dog. And then a string of, oh, it's high school math. And then so you're like, no, it can't be either of those two. It must be the languages. So I did not teach high school math. This was a little bit of like a small lie. I taught middle school math. So as I, this one was intentionally a trick. I do have a dog named Teddy. He's not anywhere near, but I'll maybe at some point, if we need a little intermission, I'll pick him up and show you on camera. And I do speak English and Spanish. My Spanish is passable. I'm not fluent, but it is passable. But I taught middle school math, not high school math. Okay. The next set, got two more of these. The first one being I've been ranked 30 in North America in a video game. I am allergic to peanuts, and I studied computer science in university. Yeah, so I did say during my small introduction, I was giving you hints. I did start my career in computer science. So that one is true. I am not allergic to peanuts. So I have actually been I found a small way in my introduction to brag about this very odd part of my life. But I have been ranked 30 in North America in a video game. That video game is, if anyone is curious, Teamfight Tactics. It's under the Riot IP. So if you play League of Legends or Valorant, or those are like the more popular ones, but
Dude,
Teamfight Tactics is a smaller game. And I was at one point ranked 30 in North America. All right, last one. And if any of you play, sounded like someone was very excited. If any of you play, please, I'm going to share my contact information afterwards for professional communications. If you want to follow up about Games for Change, or if you want to follow up about games, I'm always happy to talk about games for the sake of play, which I know we'll also talk about during this panel. All right, last one. My mother is Chinese and my father is German. I recently visited Singapore, and I currently live in Philadelphia. This one you can maybe you look at my last name. I did say I was on the East Coast. Oh no. All right. My mother is Chinese and my father is German. I did recently visit Singapore, so I was there last month. So if we had just timed these things a little bit better, I could have gone to the Impact Play Fest. But unfortunately, I'm back not in Philadelphia, but I am back in New York. So yeah, I do live in New York, not Philadelphia. I don't know if I gave that one away during my little introduction. Maybe I did. But yeah, that is the lie. So hopefully you all learned some small things about me. Maybe the being ranked 30 in a video game gives me some street cred for the rest of this panel. But I'm excited to talk about just my past, my not my whole life story, Yue, but parts of it, as it has turned into a career in nonprofit and career in using games for good. But with that, yeah, I'll pass things. I don't know, Michelle, do I pass things back to you or? Okay, I'll pass things over to my co-panelist.
Yes. Way to go, way.
Cool. Hi everyone. Firstly, oh my God, top 30 in NA for TFT. Well done. We'll talk later. Yeah. But yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Wei. I run a company called Living Theories. Basically, we're a team of gamification consultants. And we work a lot with both MNCs and with government agencies to look at gamification as a principle. So gamification is slightly different from the idea of making games in that we study how games work. We study how games influence their players or what they get their players to do, and we extract these mechanics, theories, and mindsets, and we try to apply it into non-game settings. Um, yeah, so basically for us, we are not fully in the business of making games, but rather we are in the business of gamifying real-world processes and engagement experiences. Okay, so based on that, I think my sharing will be slightly different from Matthew's sharing. So I know that information is precious, information is expensive and costly, so we are going to split our information into a poll. You get to decide what I share rather than me sharing my whole life story. Okay? So, Clarice, maybe you can share the first poll. So you guys get to choose whether I should share a little bit more about my background or whether I share more about what I currently do with Living Theories.
This is like,
Ooh, exciting.
yes, exciting. Like which horse will win the race kind of situation.
Yeah, either way, it's
Looks like a close fight.
okay, good. Oh, well, that's great. Okay, so shall we call it? Nice. Okay, so what I currently do, I think I will share. So what I currently do is I'm the director and principal consultant of Living Theories. So my job is really to meet clients and help them to identify what challenges they might go through. So for example, we have clients who come on and say, we have a training program that is very useful, but my students or my participants are super bored of it because it's super dry. How would you want to how can we gamify or revamp it to make it a lot more meaningful? Other clients could ask us things like, we want to revamp our organization's onboarding process for new hires or new joiners. How do we create a more engaging onboarding experience or orientation experience? Right now, some of the projects that we're doing include gamifying or using gamification to enhance the visitor experience in some of the museums in Singapore. We look at using gamification to implement, we worked with the CPF board. So I think for our foreign guests, the CPF is basically a kind of sovereign fund that Singapore has that's compulsory savings for all Singaporeans. So they wanted to actually educate grassroots leaders on retirement planning, and they wanted a better way, maybe to get these grassroots leaders to understand how to think about retirement planning, how to think about savings, and how to think about the role that the CPF plays in it. So we designed a board game for them as a prelude to their training session. So they ran that for about 900 to 1,000 grassroots leaders over the course of 9 months. So that was pretty great. Yeah, so that's essentially the type of work that we do. Okay. So based on that, we shall move on, I think, to the second poll. So the second poll, you guys get to choose. What type of gamer am I, or what type of learner am I? Matthew, please choose the right option, Matthew. No. Okay.
The numbers are still running. Give it like two,
Yeah.
yeah, a few more seconds.
Oh,
Yeah, man, you share both.
Teresa, you're a very good wedding MC, you know. I think you're very good at like making people do things. Cool? Okay, great. Yeah, okay, fair enough. So I think I'll share both. I'll share maybe the type of learner that I am first. So the type of learner that I am, I'm a very kinesthetic learner in that I like to touch things. I like to be able to physically experience things, for me to absorb it best. I am also a very impatient learner. So I'm someone who likes to immediately start to apply things and start to do things. And sometimes that is to my detriment because I don't listen to the full story sometimes. So I'm quite a fast mover. Um, yeah, so generally when I learn, I tend to move around. I tend to want to talk to people. I tend to want to discuss things. So I'm quite a discursive learner as well. In terms of the type of gamer, I am not a very disciplined gamer in that I don't like to follow set paths for doing things. So I tend to be a bit rebellious. In that I like to try what we call meta comms or off meta comms, in that we like to experiment with different ways we can play a character or play a game style to see what we can learn. So very often that involves a lot of failure. That involves a lot of very awkward conversations with your teammates, but it also makes your triumphs a lot more valuable. Yeah. Okay, so I think my last poll that I have would be this. So you guys get to choose whether I share more about what games greatly inspired me or what people greatly inspired me to do what I do right now. Ooh, well, very tight, huh? Not bad. Quite interesting. Thanks, Grace. I like Grace just when people share with me, people. Like, got it. Oh, sorry, Grace. I think the mob has spoken the other way. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, great. Wow. That's awesome. Nice. Okay. So I guess I'll share games then. So I think what games greatly inspired me to do what I do. We were trying to figure out what how we actually the first program that we actually designed was to look at how people choose their life paths, or try to figure out their careers. And actually the games that greatly inspired us were what we call MMORPGs, massively multiplayer online role-playing games. So games like World of Warcraft, EverQuest, if you played those games. So the idea of these games is that you create your own characters. So you could be an elf warrior, a human magician, an undead healer, so on and so forth. And you go and explore the world, complete quest, and form kind of groups, right? So we tried to understand a little bit more about why people chose different characters, how their own play styles, their own mentalities got them to pick different characters based on maybe their own personal likes and wants, their own personal backstories, and how they like to play the game, right? And of course, when you choose a different character, say for example, I choose a warrior versus a magician versus a healer, how I play my character will be very different from the other person, right? So what skills I would need versus what equipment or what weapons I would need would be drastically different from my best friend who might be playing something totally different from me. So if we take that concept and we apply it into career planning, you will realize that a lot of people go through the same process. So maybe Matthew and I are best friends sitting next to each other in class, right? But because we want so different things, our life paths are going to diverge very greatly. So we can't process the lessons in exactly the same way because we have to learn to apply it differently based on our life skills. So that was actually the genesis of our first program, Dreamcatcher, that we designed as a role-playing game, a tabletop role-playing game that we ran in schools. So almost like a D&D form, a Dungeons and Dragons format where kids got to play with us and develop their characters and concurrently develop their real world characters as they kind of move through life. Yeah, so that was kind of what we did. Yeah. So okay, those are my 3 questions. I hope that shared a little bit more about what I am and what I do. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ray and Matthew, for all your sharing. I think it got people starting to think and got curious about you. So this is where I'm going to encourage people to also ask questions. Right, based on what you've heard from Xi-Wei and Matthew, I'm going to ask you to start putting your questions into the chat, and then we'll respond to the questions accordingly from the chat. We might ask you to unmute yourself to then also ask your questions verbally, so that we get to hear your voice. And then, of course, then the intonations and the nuances in your questions could also come up, and you could further those questions that you have. So I'm going to give you like maybe 30 seconds now. If you have any questions already burning in you for these 2 speakers, just put them in first. So 30 seconds, I'm going to keep quiet so that your brain gets the time to go and think through rather than hear me blabber, blabber, blabber. And then you can type in the questions. And of course, Matthew, you can ask Xi-Wei questions. Xi-Wei can also ask Matthew questions. Please put your questions into the chat as well. Clarice, also feel free. You have already been putting questions in. So play along, everyone. And as we are waiting for people to put in their questions in the chat, we're going to be able to also kickstart some additional sharing to have you have more questions come in. Okay. So as you're typing, I'm going to ask Matthew and Xi-Wei to share a little bit more about some real-world examples of integrating games into education. Both of you have a lot of experience in terms of working with people or yourselves being in education, and therefore you probably think of like, how can we make this more exciting, more interesting, more engaging, more immersive for the learner? So perhaps I'm going to ask you guys to banter off each other just to share a little bit about these real world examples that you either have already created or are ideating. Shall we have Wei go first this time, and then Matthew can follow up?
Sure, sure. So I think we spend quite a lot of time researching games and how games kind of work in terms of transforming maybe a lesson or a perspective that you might want to explore into a format in which you can play quite easily, right? So we have so maybe I'll share with you a couple of examples on the screen, okay? So just give me one moment.
So while Wei is putting up the screen, the things on the screen, thanks guys for putting in your questions. Let them keep rolling in, right? And we'll try our best to answer as many as possible. If not verbally, then sometimes our panel might just put it into the chat as well to respond to your questions.
Yeah. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, can see. You share
Great.
audio?
Let me. Oh, is the audio sharing?
Are you playing?
Is the audio
No
sharing?
sound, no sound.
No? Okay, give me a sec. Let me. Is it not sharing the audio?
No, not hearing
Oh,
anything.
okay, give me a second. Sorry. Let me try this again, yeah? I got it, guys. Don't worry, I got it. Okay.
Yes.
So I think for us, we try to study these things where, I mean, even big companies like KFC will try to create different experiences to get people to go through something maybe a bit more mundane, like an orientation or a training program, in a way that's a lot more interactive and quite exciting. So we will study things all the way from what themes do you use? Why do they use a more horror or thriller theme than a fun theme, right? What are the elements that are involved in this? How do they actually do the voices and the sounds, and what are the in-game mechanics that will work? So our job is really to try to understand these things as we propose this to our clients, or as we do our research, or we educate some of our clients in terms of how to think about games or game design as part of your experience development. Yeah. Yep. So,
Thanks, Wei.
hmm.
Matthew, how about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk a little bit about our, I guess, Games for Changes flagship program. It's called the Student Challenge. It takes a slightly different approach. It is instead entirely centered around students designing their own games. And so instead of playing a game or having some learning outcome or learning experience gamified itself, the students are charged with designing a game that tackles some issue in life that is important to them. It's usually aligned with one of the UN Sustainability Development Goals, but every year we have a wide variety. I think we have, students submit games around solving world hunger, solving climate sustainability, solving even more niche issues around like fast fashion or saving our oceans or things like that. But it sort of charges youth with taking a step back before you can play a game and asking them, hey, like if you wanted to create an experience for someone else that they'll really enjoy, but that they'll learn something from, like how would you need to do that? And so we really enjoy just seeing what kids are able to come up with, what the youth are able to create um, as games that they actually want to see. Because again, I know I talked about this a little bit in my introduction, but um, and I think someone had a question. Let me go see if I can. I was reading the questions. Yeah, Charles had a good question. I often hear impactful games being facilitated for school learners, but what about for working adults who are keen on such games? And there's all of these different directions we want to take, right? Like often what you think about as the tradition is adults assuming they know what kids want and making games for kids to play. But the opposite can be true, right? Kids know what they want and they can make games for themselves, but they can also make games for adults, and adults can make games for adults. This entire genre of serious games or impact games, I think, is very unidirectional right now. Where again, it's these adults or game studios that think they know exactly what to create for engagement for kids. But Charles, I think your question is a great one. Are there these similar experiences out there for adults to learn and have fun, right? Like when I do professional development or when I go to other panels, they're not nearly this fun. So again, I'm so honored to be at this one, but the experiences that we have as adults typically are really dry, right? And similarly, I don't think kids are given enough opportunities to create things for one another. And so that's something that we focus on a lot in the Student Challenge is kids creating games for each other, but also kids creating games for adults, which I think can be a really exciting way to start the conversation about what does it mean to play and what does it mean to have a really fun experience while you're learning. Sorry, I was a little all over the place there, but
No worries. It was great that you're sharing that as well, and to give us a little bit of thinking of how we don't necessarily have to rely on just one party to create the games, and that will then help to kind of like address these real world challenges that we face in education. We think that the adults might know more, and perhaps not. Maybe it's the students or the youth themselves who know what they would like to learn most and best, in which way that they would learn. And that leads us perhaps to this next point, right? Like, one of the things that we perhaps realize in bringing games into education is there's this part of education where we ask students or participants or youths to kind of like do reflections. And that could potentially be one of the more challenging aspects of education, to gamify or to put a game in. So I'd like to hear from you guys, like, are there any thoughts or any ideas around how games could potentially enhance the reflection process in education, for the youth to learn better or to just allow the learning to land better. Any of you would like to go?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. So I think when it comes to reflections is both uh it's both a personal and a group exercise, right? You're looking at it from I need to reflect on what I've gone through, and then there's also the sharing component on maybe the rest of the group or the rest of my fellow participants will value hearing from me as well. So I think when it comes to gamification, which is not the idea of making a game out of it, but using game mechanics to maybe help the process a little bit, then we look at how best we can get people to validate their teammates. So it helps people be less reticent to share. So for example, if there's an honor system every time someone volunteers to share, then that helps because it's a form of like saying, and I can choose my validation, right? So it's almost like a LinkedIn emoji kind of thing, right? That's insightful, that's very meaningful, that was very heartfelt or something like that. And so that does two things. The first thing is that provides a variance of of showing you how your sharing has impacted another person. So there is a variance in that. And the other thing is that because there is a choice of emoji and whatnot, it gets the person who is responding to you to think a little bit more about how it's impacted me. So I don't just get to say, hey, well done, because that's a very, very default kind of soulless validation, right? Rather than that, if we vary the types of validation that we can give you, it suddenly by that simple motion adds a lot of meaning into how you might receive and give feedback to that process. Yeah.
Thanks, Wei. Matthew?
So I'm thinking about when I taught middle school math, I actually taught four grades. I taught fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, which is very rare. But it's a really eye-opening experience because that's a huge band in ages. My fifth graders were still, primary school age. They're 9, maybe 10. And then my eighth graders are getting up into like middle adolescence. They're 13, maybe some of them were 14. And that difference in age was very eye-opening when I would try to walk through activities that asked kids to reflect on what they learned or just to share and be vulnerable. And I think that gamification or components of games being applied to the different age groups need to be applied very, very differently. For my youngest students, they liked getting points, basically, like you're saying, Wei, like an honor system or a point system. They liked getting stickers. They liked winning. They liked being seen. They were still very young. They wanted to share. They wanted to have the spotlight on them. And I'm sure, as many of you know, if you have ever taught the sort of older adolescent kids, or if you have older adolescent kids yourselves, or have nieces and nephews, maybe they don't want to share or be vulnerable. Like they're in this stage of life where everything is really awkward and uncomfortable, and they're trying to be cool, and they don't want to. They don't want their friends to think that they enjoyed the lesson because that's not cool, and they're very, very shy, very awkward. And so the biggest thing for them, when we think about gamification for the youngest students, it's like, oh, you're getting points, you're winning. The biggest thing for some of my older students was just the establishment of really healthy and shared community guidelines. So it's almost like if we're going to play this game, if we're going to do this sharing, there need to be some really obvious structures for how you share and how you respond to one another and how you show respect. And that there is actual value in being able to reflect on what you learned and talk about it beyond just saying something as simple as, oh, today we learned about history. It was a good lesson. It's like, well, we want to talk about like what parts of history, and you want to talk about like, oh, I kind of struggled with this part of the lesson because it was really difficult for me. And I hope that in the future, I can get some help from someone else. So my biggest takeaway here is that it's not one size fits all. Like, I don't even know how it would work for first graders. I don't know how it would work for 12th years or university age students. Like all of these structures need to be tailored not necessarily just by age, but by developmental stages or by what they're actually interested in. Because I think at their core, everyone likes to share, everyone likes to reflect and internalize what they've learned, but the environment that they're doing it in needs to really be tailored to the things that they like. the things that engage them. And that'll be very different depending on who you're talking to.
Do you
Yeah.
have any suggestions on like what tools or what approaches to use to gamify or to make it more fun? Do they have like cards that they raise up in class to validate, or do they?
Yeah, for one of my classes, it just by happenstance, I had a class that was very, very small, and it was almost all very sporty people. I don't know, like they were all athletes. And so when we would do different types of share outs, I had like a little like Nerf, like sort of not styrofoam, but like, soft football that they would throw to each other. So it was almost like, I don't know, you've heard of like the talking stick, or like I have the talking stick, like I'm the only person that's allowed to talk. But it was a way for them to just like engage their bodies, do something they liked. But when it was someone else's turn to speak, or if someone wanted to share something, the person who had the ball at the time had to just lob it over to them. We didn't break any windows, and it was only for this. It was a very unique class that they had a lot of energy, and I was trying to find interesting ways to engage them. So that was one, just finding a way for them to be physically active as well as mentally active when sharing.
Where you wanted to? Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually so maybe I'll share a very, very quick photo. Basically, I did this. So for context, I did this for an adults corporate retreat. At the end of something, well, very similar to a D&D experience that we ran for adults as well. And basically, instead of just getting them to reflect, we actually designed award cards. Sorry, this is a very Singaporean localized thing, so I'll explain it a little bit more. So basically, we started to give out award cards, right? And we said, okay, the first award card is for if you look at the top right, it's the Garang Club. So Garang means like really, really enthusiastic and really, really like the first one to go and attack something, right? That warrior kind of person. So we wanted the group to award the most garang person of the group, and they awarded it by pointing at a person. So then we go 1, 2, 3, and they pointed it, and then some of them shared why they felt this person was like really up there or put himself forward, right? And then we awarded that person, and then we gave the next award for maybe the tender loving care blanket, someone who cared for the team the most, and then everyone got to vote again. So because we did it in a kind of artifact kind of way, it got people to first be able to validate each other by pointing out, and then provided a natural platform for them to share a little bit more about why they deserved it and why they felt that, each other kind of had. So these are some of the ways that we actually use to create some level of reflection in a more friendly environment. Yeah, by providing some context to it. Yeah.
Thanks for your sharings. And there's more questions in the chat now, from different people. I think there's one that's from Annie, ENNE, who asked, actually, she's curious to hear from the both of you, your thoughts around how different these might actually be in terms of outcomes of impact and the program itself. When you're gamifying learning versus developing a game.
Oh. So maybe I'll go first. And this is something. So I've been very fortunate to be part of a lot of focus groups in Singapore with a lot of ministries and stuff, all figuring out how to. And I've been mansplained about games so many times. It's awesome. So I would give the following piece of advice. Especially maybe more for the Singapore market. I'm not sure about the international market, but if you are thinking about designing a game, I think the first step is to think about your audience, right? So theming it is one thing, but the other thing is if you're designing a game for good, then try to design it for a captive audience rather than a free audience. So what I mean by that is if I put a good game, like a game that teaches you about global warming on an open market, you're likely to not get a lot of traction because opportunity cost dictates that they will play a better made game or a game that with more value and so on and so forth. So you won't get the kind of traction so I've had people who tell us that, hey, if we create a really good game, all the youths will play my game instead of playing like Mobile Legends. I'm like, that's not gonna happen lah. But if you do replace a moral ed lesson with a game, if you do replace counseling with a game, then that sees a lot more value in it. The other thing about gamification and games is also in my personal experience when it comes to Singaporean youth, is that it's hard to design something that doesn't come across as tacky sometimes. It requires a lot of nuance. It requires really a lot of well-designed games to be able to come across as like, okay, this is a really well-made game, right? Um, so if you're not confident in your ability to create something like that, then use gamification in that you can gamify elements around the core rather than try to create a game but not know exactly what you're doing and then end up falling flat lah. So we've seen this happen a couple of times before as well. Yeah, so that would just be like my advice when looking at these things.
Yeah. And at Games for Change, we see this as extremely different. And one of these is our area of expertise, which is developing games, and the other is really not, which is just general gamification. But I'll speak to the developing games again, going back to our student challenge at the risk of, sounding like a broken record. There's a lot of power in allowing people to kind of see what's going on under the hood. And what I mean by that is giving them tools to create their own game can be this really eye-opening experience about play itself. Like understanding, instead of going into a game thinking like, I want to have fun, if you're creating a game, you're forced to think about what are other people going to enjoy? Like, what is going to resonate for the people that I'm creating this game for? There are definitely people out there who just make games basically for themselves and they hope for the best. But broadly speaking, if you're a good game designer, you're thinking about, Simon, you had the question, how do you tailor games for different age? You're thinking about the age group of the game you're creating. You're thinking of, in our challenge, like what are the judges going to like, but also what are the attendees at our festival going to like when they like play our games in the arcade. And so there's this really, I guess, unique experience outside of general gamification or game-based learning when you step into the shoes of the designer and you start to do things like design thinking or systems thinking or any of those interesting parts of game development where you are, you're thinking about so many more things than just what am I going to learn or what am I going to enjoy. I think it really can be an impactful experience, not just for youth, but for adults as well. So, I've made a couple, admittedly not very good video games of my own back when I was a computer science student and then in the industry, just sort of as like side projects. And it's a really eye-opening experience. So I would encourage all of you, if you're interested in games, if you like gamification, spend a weekend, do a game jam. I know Clarice mentioned one of the organizations that Bold at Work is partnered with, or the Playfest is partnered with, does game jams. Go to a game jam, make a terrible game. It's totally fine. But the experience or like the act of trying to design a game around a particular purpose, whether that purpose is just having fun, or that purpose is to learn something, or that purpose is to experience something and feel something, is very different from playing a game with that purpose. So I would encourage all of you to go make a game. That is our like big thesis at Games for Change, is that the design process is in its own way a really magical form of game-based learning.
Yeah. So I think I saw one comment and I really love that. It's like basically Matthew's coming from the really game designer and I'm coming from the really gamification point of view. So how we approach each subject is very different. So actually I think riffing off what Matthew mentioned. So I'm also so how I then apply what he mentioned was I'm also a reservist. So I'm a trainer in my police division as well. So where we do national service, we're all drafted in. So I'm a trainer in the police force. And of course, when I train, people who come back for like 1 day or 2 day courses, they're super bored and everyone wants to be anywhere but there, right? So when you go through scenarios, no one cares. Until we challenge them to go, okay, look, you guys know everything, right? So I'd like you now to come up with your own scenarios. So basically, um, so I think Kenjin will probably know this. But well, in the police terms, we have these things. So this is a little bit of police education for you guys. Like in terms of reporting. So when we report a case, we will always use an a kind of acronym called SALUTE. So stands for size, which is the number of people. Activity A is activity, which is what they're doing. L is location, which is where the incident occurred. U is uniform. which is what they were wearing, what the suspects were wearing. T is time, which is what time did the event occurred at, and E is equipment, right, which is what they might be carrying. So we'll know if they're carrying weapons, or if they're not carrying weapons, so on and so forth. So what we do is based on this acronym, we get them to create their own scenario, and we'll tell them, okay, give me the L, which is location, then they'll give me a location. So okay, give me the number of people. And the more they do this, the more involved they get in their own case that they're creating for their fellow officers to solve. Then it becomes almost this like, how wacky can I create this case, but still make it feasible, right? And then they start to apply a lot of these wacky techniques. The reason why this works in a training environment is that it's not only new for the participants, but it's also new for the trainers because the trainers themselves haven't gone through this case before. So the participants start to see how a trainer would approach this case, this crazy, wacky case that the participants themselves have created. And then this fosters this kind of flattened, uniform learning that everyone goes through together, which is quite fun and quite unique lah. So if you are in a scenario development kind of role that you might be looking at as a facilitator, as a trainer, this could be a method that you might want to try. Yeah.
So exciting hearing your stories and how you come about doing your stuff. Now it gives me inspiration of how I'm going to conduct my trainings and my work too. I'm going to invite and to see if this person is still here. Faith, are you still here? Because Faith has this interesting, I think like 2 questions in the chat, and then Clarice has been engaging her in the chat. And I'm wondering, like, based on the engagement that Clarice had with you in the conversation, are your questions still the same, or has the question evolved such that Matthew and Xi-Wei can kind of like respond to it too?
Okay,
Faith,
hi. Yeah,
you
I'm
want to turn
having
on
a
your
big
video?
dinner, so I will,
Oh, okay, sure.
yeah, I won't turn on my video. Yes, so I happen to be an educator, and my students are actually in higher learning, so they are probably 17 to about 19. So typically, in a 2-hour lesson, which is conducted very tutorial-like, I mean, we are very intentional in creating opportunities for students to interact. But I think depending on the student motivation levels, we notice then that it always goes back to a mode where it's very tutor driven. So it's not, it's hard to elicit responses from students. So I thought perhaps gamification or that lends itself to creating a game would be useful. However, then how much fun should we incorporate into it such that they are more motivated, but would too much fun then dilute the learning objectives? Yeah. I know that it might be hard to actually find a sweet spot or to be so definitive about the percentage, but yeah.
I hear you. So I think the first maybe misconception that I would like to clarify is that yeah, so gamification is not always about fun, right? In that not all game mechanics make things more fun, right? Say for example, I get you to do an exam, take your time, versus I tell you you only have 10 minutes to do an exam. It doesn't make things more fun. It greatly stresses you out and it gets you to go a bit crazy lah, right? Or I tell you that 3 strikes and you're out. Suddenly your the consequence of your actions become a lot more real. So gamification or game mechanics don't necessarily always make things more fun. And just like how you have free reign to choose whatever games you want to play, certain mechanics will appeal to different types of people. So I'm sure Matthew would know like battle player types and things like that, right? You have killer type of people who are highly competitive. You have socializer people who only play if their friends play. Explorer people like me who might want to, go for more fringe strategies and stuff like that. So different mechanics apply to different people. If you are going for a class, then you kind of might want to look at what mechanics would want to get your pupils to drive home the lessons that you want them to learn. Um, as opposed to always making things more fun, because sometimes making things more fun is not the easiest thing to do and might be a bit too time consuming, as you mentioned, or too distracting from the main lesson. Yeah, so yeah.
I think the only other thing I'd say, and it's going to sound very silly, but you want to make whatever gamification you choose to do feel meaningful. And of course, that's much easier said than done. But when I was early on in teaching, I had a lot of failures to do this where I thought, oh, it's fine. I'll just, I'll add points to this, or, kids can win this or win that, or just like small little gamified rules that I sort of arbitrarily tacked on because, oh, it sounds like it'll be fun. Like it doesn't really matter, right? But then as it sort of goes on, like Wei is saying, the kids get really, really into it, and they have different mental models of how you're supposed to play. They have different archetypes of player, and I had not thought through this at all. And so they were just picking apart the poorly implemented systems that I had of like, well, how do you get these points? Why did they get those points? Well, I didn't get a point here. What do the points do? Do they have any meaning at all? And so my biggest thing around gamification is just thinking through,
Yeah.
How do you make it a good game, right? If I go into a game and all you do is click, and every time you click, you get a point, it's not a really good game. Like, I don't think that'd be very fun, but I can get a lot of points. I could sit there and click for hours and hours and hours. I get a lot of points. And this genre does exist, right? There are clicker games out there where all you're, at least on paper, doing is clicking, but they have deeper systems where eventually you can automate your clicks and then you can build structure. There's stuff that you can do. And so it's, for me, not necessarily a balance of how much game should there be and how much serious should there be? Like, is there going to be game burnout? For me, it's more a question of how meaningful is the game part, because then it won't really lead to burnout. It'll be something that the students actually find productive. Um, and it'll be very, very obvious once it flips the switch and becomes toxic or bad. You'll start to see students complaining about it or like stressing about the game. Like the second I had students stressing about the point it was over. Like we're not doing that anymore, right? It's supposed to be a way of increasing engagement, not a way of punishing a different style of learning or punishing a different way of thinking. But I would just be thoughtful about that part.
Yeah. So I think I'd agree in the fact that um go prepared in that if you are going to gamify a lesson, rehearse it beforehand, know exactly what you're doing, right? Rather than make up stuff on the spot unless you're super seasoned. Because if things fall flat, and your students start to roll their eyes at you, I think it's hard to recover from that as well. In terms of reputation, and in terms of like how you might carry on your next lesson and things like that, lah. So yeah, I totally agree. And we've seen it fall flat a lot of times. So I see a lot of people run workshops and they go like, okay guys, you get 5 points. I'm like, great. What do the points do? What do I get? Oh, nothing. Then okay, then your whole system is a waste of time, right? And people will find this out like 5 minutes into your system anyway. So be careful of that lah. Yeah.
Thanks. PC just put into the chat, so I'm gonna invite PC to also switch on his mic since his video is already on. Would you like to speak your question?
Yeah, I suppose it's I guess I'm coming from the context of games and lessons, right? Teaching or imparting certain lessons. When you actually impart those lessons, how do you do that? Do you actually stop and then reflect on that last game, last bit of game? Or do you let them go on? How do you actually facilitate that lesson thing? Is it like, you ask them to share, or you just tell them, you tell them the lesson itself, a lecture or a facilitation thing, that kind of stuff?
Matt, would you like to go first, Matthew?
Sure. So I'm sort of hearing this as just a question of as you get towards the end of the lesson, when that gamified experience ends and they're being asked to then reflect or internalize what they've learned, that it can feel sort of stilted. Like you have all this momentum, kids are having fun, and then all of a sudden, it's the game is over almost. And I think the game doesn't have to end. Like I think we've all played games where there are very thoughtful ways in the game where you can sort of take a little break. I know, Wei, you were talking about MMORPGs. I think in some of them, like in World of Warcraft, right? You can go and find a campfire. There's a hotkey in the game to have your character sit down, and you can eat a loaf of bread and drink some water in the game. Like you can literally rest in this game that you're playing. And by sitting down, the way that World of Warcraft works in terms of like regenerating your health, it happens on like a tick-based system. And if you're running around, it happens kind of slowly. But if you sit down, you'll actually regenerate health faster. And so there's ways in real games to sort of force you to sit and rest. And you might even think about like, oh wow, that was a really close encounter that I just had. Like my character almost died. I'm going to sit and rest. Um, and then I'm ready for the next encounter. And I think that there are similar ways to do this in real life lessons where it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm being like pulled out of the fun and it's like really awkward and feels terrible. But there are natural ways for you to say, like, oh, like that encounter ended. And it's actually a good time right now to sit and rest or sit and think about all the things that we've done and maybe reflect with friends so that you're ready for the next encounter. And this is sort of how I would frame it with my students. Obviously, I wouldn't talk about World of Warcraft. We totally get derailed. But the idea for reflection for us would really be about, okay, like it's time to rest. Like we just did so much, we learned so much. The reason we would sit and rest right now and reflect is that we're ready for the next time that we come back together and do something that's similarly fun. And when we're thinking about these systems for gamification, like we were just talking about with Annie's question, if the system feels meaningful for students and they know that the next lesson is also going to be really high energy and is also going to be really fun, then they're happy to take that moment to rest and have a little break. But it's when the system falls apart and they're like, well, the next lesson is going to be boring anyway. What am I resting for? Like, what's the point? That's where it's sort of fallen apart. So I don't think reflection has to pull someone out of the experience. I think that there are ways that you can sort of naturally have it feel like this, like, oh, we're doing something exciting and now we're resting. We're doing something exciting and now we're resting. But it's on you to sort of build the culture around that where they know that once we go down and we're resting, they're excited to go back up. But if you have a sequence of bad lessons where they sort of sit at this low level, that's where you maybe need to make a change. But in reflection, usually I try to frame it around you're reflecting on this lesson, but you should be looking forward and excited about the next lesson as well.
Yeah, so I think I fully agree with that. I think it's almost like a wedding dinner sometimes. The MC has to know when to interject, right? When the energy is high, when the energy is low, when you're planning an experience out, measuring the cadence of how the energy flows, when a low time is for you to pick out. But I would say that if you're designing a game and you're conducting in a classroom, then the experience takes precedence, which means that knowing that you can't suddenly interject and say, oh, wait, hold on. Before you move on, what do we learn? Okay, then that is a total break in. So you can plan for it in your game, right? Like, I've completed quest part one, and quest part one ends here. And after our reflection, you get to pick new weapons for quest part two, for example, right? Then there is a clear and present break in terms of how we want to plan it. The other thing that I will also mention thanks Simon. Yeah, well, past trauma, past life. Um the other thing I also mentioned is when you do design a game, it's what we call emergent gameplay happens all the time. So people don't always take the lessons that you want them to take if you're really getting them to play a game as you would design a game, because you are opening it up to, I think as Matthew mentioned, someone might want to rip your game apart because that's just how they play. Another person might want to follow exactly by the book what you're trying to give them, right? And it's all valid in a game. You can't just tell them, "Oh no, that's not how you play my game. This is how you play my game. Did you not get what I've tried to teach you?" Then your game falls apart. The game has to be able to give people the autonomy to make certain decisions and play the way they want to play. So sometimes I feel that you gotta go into this with your eyes open if you're designing this for a lesson plan. So you have to be prepared for people to say, oh, actually I took something else from the game. Not what you intended, but maybe something else. And you have to be prepared to maybe debrief that and reflect that part as well as to how come this student, took something else from it. Yeah.
Thank you for your sharings. I think we'll take Simon's question as the last question for tonight before we wrap up today's session. Simon's question is on, oops, it jumped. It's a great and fun way to learn if we use gamification, and it does take a seemingly longer time. Should we be focusing on just the learning points, or just just a handful of learning points? Or should we like do the
Yes.
whole?
So I think and okay, definitely Matthew would be way more experienced than me in this element. But for me, even when we're designing experiences for our clients, and they have a whole list of like 10 core things that they want their participants go through and stuff like that, we'll tell them narrow it down to like 2. Then everything else is peripheral or ancillary that we'll try to insert in. But if you leave with nothing else, leave with 2 or something along those lines, right? Because the more you try to include all your learning points in it, the more convoluted your entire experience becomes. And when that happens, imagine if you are trying to sit through that event. Are you sure you're gonna be able to pick out all 10, or are all the 10 gonna get in? It's like, yeah, I'm like king of analogies, right? So it's like cooking, right? Where you have too many spices and stuff. People don't know what it's supposed to taste like. So in the same way, when you design a game and you have too many learning points or too many things that you're trying to put in, people don't know what the core is supposed to be. And therefore, you end up with a very disjointed kind of experience. So I think that is sometimes the trap that maybe people tend to fall into, but they're also investing a lot in a game, which I understand, right? And therefore you want to create a one size fits all. But the one size fits all is usually very dangerous because if it fails on all counts. Yeah, so something to be careful about when you're thinking about learning points within games.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd say is a lot of the time with gamification, the whole point is just to build interest or build passion. It's not necessarily to replace the entire lesson or have all of the learning points be included in the game or in the game design process or the gamification, whatever it is you're doing. But even if we use this webinar as an example, like Wei asked in the poll 2 different questions, and there were people who immediately said, "Oh, well, I didn't get the one I wanted. Wei, we should connect afterwards. I want to hear about the other one, the one you didn't answer." And in mine, with Two Truths and Not, I shared some things and some interesting facts about being a gamer. And Wei was saying, "Oh, well, I want to learn more about that. Like, we should connect afterwards." And this is sort of how you should be approaching gamification. It's not necessarily to say, "Oh, I have these 10 points that I want you to learn. I'm going to make a really good game that's really, really fun, and you're going to learn all 10 points." I would approach it from the lens of, I want you to learn 1 point, and the game was so fun and you were so interested that you're going to go on your own, or maybe in my class, ideally in my class, if I'm a good teacher, but you're going to be interested in learning the other 9 points because the game that we played built this interest for you in whatever it was we were learning. So if we're learning about some component of history and we go into Minecraft and we're learning about I don't know, the temples in a particular part of the world, and in Minecraft we actually explore one and then we build our own temple. Well, you didn't learn the entire history of that culture, or you didn't learn everything there is to learn, but you might now be really interested. You're like, "Oh, this temple is so cool. I was so excited that I got to build my own. Like, I'm really interested in learning more about this culture. Like, what else do they do? And what else is there to understand?" And that the remainder of that learning doesn't also have to happen in Minecraft, doesn't have to be gamified, but you have created like this almost this like inroad for yourself as an educator,
Yeah.
where your audience is now captivated. Like they want to learn more because it's all revolving around this first experience they had that was really fun and really engaging. So I would think about it often in that way. It's not Gamification does not have to cover all the points. It should instead just build excitement in later covering all of the points.
Thanks, guys. This was really informative. I think everybody kind of like took away a little bit of something. And that's the curious part that I have now, right? Like, what did you guys take away that little bit of something? So if you can put it down into the chat, either an action you like to take from here on, like I'm going to go and learn about game design, or I'm going to learn about gamification a bit more in depth. That could be one of those things, right? Or in 3 words, say what were some of the, like, how would you describe today's session in 3 words, right? So these are some of the, I'm gonna buy away. Sure, Wei. Yes. coffee, any specific coffee. All right. So yeah, so if you can put it into the chat, what is that one action you're gonna take, or perhaps 3 words of how today's experience was like for you. Please put that into the chat. I'm gonna ask Wei and Matthew to then verbalize either the 3 words how you experienced today's session, or what is like the one thing, Wei's one action is to go and buy coffee. Other than buying coffee, Wei, is there anything else that you would?
I think so. Wait, so I'm supposed to what, 3 words?
Either 3 words to kind of like summarize your experience today, or one action you're gonna take beyond buying coffee from today's session, and adding Matthew to Riot.
Oh, okay, so so actually it's buy coffee, swap stories. I think that's my takeaway. I would like to meet as many of you as I can. Sit down, swap stories, because you all come from different backgrounds. You're all giving us crazy ideas of where it comes from. And yeah, if we can be of service to you in any way, then I'll be more than happy to.
Wei probably drop how they can reach out to you to swap
Right,
stories,
good
buy
point.
coffee. Yeah.
Sure.
Matthew can do the same into the chat as well if you like to. And once you're
Let
done
me
with
just
that,
share.
yeah. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Babe. Yes, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll go with 3 words then instead of what I plan on doing next. Well, I shared my email, so everyone, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk about the work that we're doing at Games for Change. It's very, very similar to the Impact Playfest. If you ever find yourself on my side of the world, it's we have conferences and programs throughout the year that I think would be just really awesome opportunities for us to network, but for you to find other like-minded folks who are really interested in games and gamification. But my 3 words, I found this energizing. I mean, it was early in the morning when we started, but this was a really, really, really great way to start my day. So energizing. What else? Energizing. I'm very grateful to have been brought into this opportunity. So energizing, grateful, and hopeful. I think that the games industry, at least in America, often is under fire for being this really bad industry or really bad hobby for kids. And I'm hopeful that through all of the inspiring work that we're all doing, we can change the narrative a little bit around how games can be used for good for youth and for adults, just around the world, for social change, for education. So those would be my 3.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Really, really honored actually to be here. I'm not a gamer per se, but I've learned so much in today's session from the both of you. And I look forward to continue to connect with both of you and everyone else who's on the chat. I'm gonna hand the time back to Clarice. She's got a little shameless advert to share.
Okay, I won't hold too much of your time. Just a very quick spill on 2 things. One, if you really want to hop on a game design process, Matthew did a quick call out. We are running a game jam by Press Start Studios. Press Start Studio is actually part of Games for Change, and they're partnering us to run a very quick 2-hour session on 22nd of March. So if you like to sign up, it's 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. The link is somewhere in the chat, but I'll follow up with the email with the deets as well. Otherwise, just the second pitch, we are running our final webinar next Wednesday, same time, 8 p.m. Singapore time zone. And the theme of that will be how to create your game from concept to creation. So if you'd like to be part of that as well, I'll drop you guys a note. Or if you guys have signed up, we'll see you guys there in the next session. Otherwise, thank you all so much. I am going to do my night routine. I'm playing MLBB later, and that's my night routine. But thank you all for joining us today. If you'd like to leave your contact, leave it down in the chat function. Otherwise, have a great evening, good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. See you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
You so tough, that's right. She's my